Well, it shouldn't surprise you that, in my mind, live television and the broadcast of a game should probably start at the beginning and end at the end, and not sooner. Certainly, if you have people watching a game, although they didn't see the Philly-Montreal game across the network in its entirety, if they see it tied up and they're ready for overtime, and then you tell them that you're not going to be able to show overtime because, sorry, we have to leave. It's 11 o'clock at night. And the reason for leaving the game in midstream, as it were, was that the New Democratic Party of Ontario had just announced a new leader. And the rest of the country actually saw the Flintstones. You should know.
I did.
So
not
it wasn't
know.
all that important for anybody other than Ontario, and the people in the rest of the country made their feelings known that this was a decision that almighty Toronto or Ontario anyway, Central Canada was making for itself, and never mind anybody else. But earlier in the day, the CBC had done the same thing to a curling match. That was an important playoff match at the Briar. A couple of rocks to go. Sorry, we have to leave. I was watching with Bob Cole, and Bob gets angry at the best of times. Newfoundland was playing BC. I was living in Vancouver at the time, so I had interest in the BC rink. He had interest in the Newfoundland rink, and we didn't see the match conclude on TV. So that was frustrating enough. The same thing happened later at night in the hockey broadcast and Hockey Night in Canada. And what I did was express frustration, I guess is the best way to put it, that this was happening again. I didn't think it should ever happen. I really hoped from that day on that it would never happen again, and I think it happens far less ever since, because people realize how basically dumb it was at the time for a network to do this and just shrug its shoulders and say, this is our policy, this is what we do. That's a longer version than I'd intended, but it was live television. Sometimes you don't have a chance to gather yourself, and at the moment, I was told, I was asking a question on camera. In fact, can we go back? We've been in a commercial. Can we go back and see the end of the game? No, sign off. And I said what I said after hearing that.
Okay, let's play the short clip of it happening on March 14th, 1987. And then I have a brief clip. Ron MacLean was here a couple of months ago, sitting in that chair, and he talks about being in the room when this happened, and there's a short clip of him. And then I have a couple of Twitter questions about it.
Okay.
You know what? I did open up the Twitter. What questions do you have for Dave Hodge? And a high percentage of the questions were about the pen flip, but all like in awe of this moment, which for some reason resonates to this day.
Well, I'll explain why I think that is, but go ahead and let's hear the clips.
Now, Montreal and the Philadelphia Flyers are currently playing overtime, and are we able to go there or not? We are not able to go there. That's the way things go today in sports on this network, and the Flyers and the Canadians have us in suspense and will remain that way until we can find out somehow who won this game or who's responsible for the way we do things here. Good night for Hockey Night in Canada.
Now, before I play the Ron MacLean clip, you can't see that. This is a podcast, but you flip your pen. It's pen or pencil? Is it a pen?
It was a pen, yes.
Okay. You flip your pen in the air. Let's hear Ron MacLean briefly here.
And I was there. I was at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. I was in what we call the client room, Mike, just around the corner from the studio. I watched the whole. Doug Sellers, God love him, is no longer with us. Doug died at 50 playing hockey down in California. But Doug was the point person who was having to say to Dave, Dave said, "Don't put me on. Please just go off the air, make it look like some kind of a mistake, that we were cut off. But let's not have Hockey Night in Canada tarnished with the same brush that already the curling producers and people are." So he was begging Doug not to put him on camera. And Doug was saying, "Dave, you're our guy. You have to make this somehow palatable for the viewer and sort of get us off the hook here. It is bonus coverage. It wasn't like they watched the Flyers Canadians all night."
Right.
And it was
a last straw.
Amazing thing to watch. It was the last straw. Dave would be better to explain that. But
I got to get him in here.
I think he was just tired, and he he felt. I mean, he was entirely right, of course, and that's what made Dave great. He was always going to be the journalist first and foremost. So. But it was a crazy scene. So then it happens. I just was standing right outside the door where he delivered that little monologue. And then he comes roaring into the room where I am, and he grabs his coat off I'm sick of these guys making me look like an idiot. And then somebody grabbed him, I forget who, and says, Dave, it's okay. We'll go back to the Harbor Castle Hotel, which was a Hilton in those days, a Westin now. And we went, and I'll never forget this. Harry Neal and I drove in one car, and Dave Hodge went down in another. And there was probably about 5 or 6 of us at the little bar at the Harbor Castle. And Harry Neal at one point turned to me while we were having our beer, and he said, Ron, you should work on your relationship with Don Cherry. He says, that, I think, is going to be your ticket.
Does Ron have it right there?
Yeah, well, that's another way of saying, I think this guy over here is getting fired and you're getting his job. So, which Ron kind of already had, sort of. But, yeah, that's the way it went. I'm not sure I said much after I picked up my coat, other than I probably had a look on my face that knew I wasn't going to be back in that studio again. Although that was still to be determined. I mean, it played out in the next few days with basically CBC said, we're not happy with what you did, and I said, well, that's up to you. But I said, I hope you've taken some kind of stock of the viewers' reaction, because I told you, Mike, earlier before we started that I probably should want to talk about this, because it may have been in some ways my finest moment. It's the only moment I can think of that has never been criticized by anybody who was watching except the powers that be at the CBC. And why would any viewer sit there and go, "Oh, this is okay. We don't mind this. Let's see the Flintstones."
Yeah.
Or let's see who the new NDP leader was. I'm not suggesting that wasn't important, but all things in due time. And when you're doing live sports, other things have to wait. So it was in the end, it was the CBC saying, we'll fly you back and you come and see the head of sports and some other executives at the CBC, and you apologize for what you did, and we go back to where we started. And I said, I have absolutely nothing to apologize for. Again, ask the viewers if they need my apology, and I'll apologize to them. But I said, I don't think you'll find one that is demanding that. So basically, I said I refuse to apologize, and they said, well, you're suspended. And I said, when am I going to work next? And they said, we're not sure. And I said, well, if you're not sure when I'm working next, and I'm not sure when I'm working next, I will take this opportunity to decide that I have been fired. And there was another network covering NHL games at the time. And 5 minutes later, I had a job with them. So not to say I was real pleased at leaving Hockey Night in Canada, but 16 years was a long time. I enjoyed all of it. And, somebody said, hey, you could still be there today. I went, I think that would be difficult. That is really overstaying your welcome. I mean, I'm 25 years now at TSN, and that seems like a long time, especially when I put it next to the 16 years at Hockey Night. I'm really happy and proud of the different things I've done, and I really do say that every change has been positive. I know it's an old cliche, one door closes and another opens, but I think that's helped keep me alert and alive and fresh and interested. And I've done various things at TSN, obviously. You don't need to be changing employers to change tasks. And I need to be kept fresh.
Well, Brian, this kind of answers Brian Carstairs' Twitter question. He wants to know if you regret flipping the pencil in the air, which is actually a pen, but or has it worked out for the best?
Yeah, no, I would never say I regret anything that I did on the air live. Because if you're going to second guess stuff that you do in that situation, you'll drive yourself crazy. You have to realize that you're there, the microphone is on, the cameras are on, everything's hot. You say what you say. Obviously, I would hope I never swear, but if that happened, I would be entirely at fault, and I wouldn't blame anybody else. I think I'm responsible for everything I do. no, I don't regret for a minute what I did, because I was being myself. I was reacting to the very frustration that I had, that I knew or sensed that the viewers would have too, especially because we'd all had it, those who were watching the curling earlier in the day. And if this had been the only example of that on that day, maybe I wouldn't have reacted quite the same. But I reacted the way I reacted, and you can't take it. You can't take it back. I dropped my iPhone on the floor, a brand new one, the other day, and it didn't have a case on it yet to protect it. And boy, I swore that day, but that was entirely my fault. And what are you going to do?
Tor Habs fan, sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not. Tor Habs fan on Twitter asks, are you surprised that people still talk about the pen flip, and that to many it's one of the great moments in sports broadcasting? I
don't know that it's that. I wouldn't. I thank you, but I don't really think it qualifies as far as that goes. I mean, it's a moment that proves that live television can produce almost anything of an unexpected variety, and that's why I love anything I do. It needs to be live if at all possible. So the reporters on TSN at times needs to be taped, just for logistical purposes in the studio, scheduling purposes. But I'm always fighting to be live, because you're better that way. The show has a greater energy, and you can react, at a moment's notice to some news that might be breaking in the middle of a show. So I'm always wanting to be live, and I'll never regret anything that happens to me that happens live. I've had lights go out in the studio. What do you do then? Well, you go to commercial, or you make a joke that the world's ending, and I'm right where I'd want to be if that's happening, sitting in a TV studio. You gotta think on your feet, and live television makes you and helps you do that.
Last question on this topic, and then, as you mentioned, right away you're scooped up by CanWest Global to host their NHL coverage. But so before we get to that, Richard just wants to know if you kept the pen that you flipped. But I'm going to say no, you didn't keep that pen.
Well, no, there's an interesting story to that. I was asked on the plane back to Vancouver the next day by people who had seen it, "Do you still have the pen?" And I said yes, and they said, "Could we have it?" And I said, maybe I should hold on to it. It didn't have any real value. I had to think on my feet and say, do I want to keep it or do I not? And a gentleman from a hotel chain in Vancouver, based in Vancouver, said we could auction that pen for charity. And I said, that sounds to me like an interesting idea. So the pen wound up in the Pan Pacific Hotel's possession. They auctioned it at charity, and the bidder donated it back to the hotel, where it could be framed and shown in the lobby. I'm sure it's not there now, but for a while it had its place of prominence, where the people could see it and read a small inscription. And I thought, yeah, why shouldn't the pen get its own dose of fame?